Hello, my name is Russell Sparks. Today I'm going to talk about willpower and how we define it. Now, I had heard of willpower before I started research on this subject, but I never really paid much attention to it. Instead, I just viewed it as this abstract thing that people needed to be good at life, whatever that meant. So, I first started looking at this topic when I was searching for ways to help myself improve my leadership skills. And from there on, I went down the rabbit hole for about the past 6 months. So, what is willpower? How do we view it? Can we measure it? While we're at it, why should I even care about this stuff? Or rather, why should you care? Well, let's start with the first question. The Cambridge English Dictionary defines willpower as the ability to control your own thoughts and behavior, especially in difficult situations. Okay, so that's straightforward. Let's move on to the second question. How do we view willpower? Well, this is where things get a bit tricky. There is work that revolves around people's interpretations of willpower as either finite or infinite. A 2010 study by Stanford researcher Veronica Job and others found that depending on the belief that an individual held, people's willpower would vary, with those who believed in finite willpower having less after a stressful task, and those who believed in infinite willpower having a continuous amount regardless of those tasks' difficulty. And this shows how the power of belief can override limits. Now, this belief isn't just limited to people, it also impacts our culture. Notable figures known for having stupidly high amounts of willpower include Rocky Balboa, Captain America, Batman, and many others. All of these characters have another thing in common. Whenever they're portrayed in comic books or film, there's an antagonist that tries to injure or kill them. And for a time, it seems like the villain is winning, but then suddenly the hero gets a miraculous boost of strength, gets up, and proceeds to win. Now, while this is awesome to watch in movies accompanied by dramatic music and popcorn, this view of willpower can be detrimental to people in the long run. This is not how willpower works. Willpower is not some magical thing that can be summoned out of thin air whenever a difficult situation occurs. Alright, so let's hear a second, more realistic interpretation. Let's say that someone, I don't know who, really likes eating food. Pizza, ice cream, soda, all sorts of delicious things. Now let's say that one day, this person who shall not be named and definitely isn't sitting in front of you right now, decides to look at themselves in the mirror and get into shape. One problem, this person happens to be a bit of a nerd and has absolutely no clue how to do that. So, what do? I get an accountability partner. The type of accountability partner that you have affects how much you're willing to work out. If you have a belief that your accountability partner will do what it's supposed to do, hold you accountable, then you will be more likely to succeed. But if you believe in the opposite, then the opposite effect will happen. You will be more likely to fail. And this ties into how you must hold yourself accountable, both for your successes and failures. When I was gathering research for this project, I watched a video done at Google by a psychologist named Dr. Kelly McGonigal. During that presentation, Dr. McGonigal showed numerous studies that indicated how belief can affect the human body with stress. So believing in mental and psychological stress in a different way can actually change your body's response to that stress. A belief that stress helped your body become energized had the positive outcome of the brain viewing a stress response as helpful, while a belief that stress was bad caused detrimental effects. The energizing response helps you work better and has proven to cause less stress-related health incidents, such as heart attacks, for instance. She also discussed how negative emotions can induce a willpower-depleted state and start a downward spiral. Now, to compensate for this, we must have the understanding that we are all human. Humans make mistakes, and this is part of the process of changing who we are. It was similar with the process of facing urges, such as smokers trying to stop smoking. Sarah Bowen, a scientist at the Addictive Studies Research Center at the University of Washington, ran a study where they had heavy nicotine-deprived smokers come into a room with their favorite brand of cigarette, and then go through a series of experiments designed to deplete their already weakened willpower systems. Smokers taught willpower control methods were able to lower their chances of relapse. In this particular study, the method that they were taught was called surfing the urge, where the smokers would focus on the sensation of wanting to smoke and keep focusing with the knowledge that as time went on, that urge would eventually disappear. So, willpower can allow us to do some pretty cool things. There was an interesting joint study by the University of Michigan and Shaanxi University in China that showed a discrepancy between Eastern and Western cultures and their beliefs about willpower. American college students believed in the depletion of mental resources more than their Chinese counterparts. And this was as the scientists predicted. However, the Chinese students had a stronger belief in depletion while resisting temptation, which shows a different cultural norm. So, now we've established that willpower is not solely dependent on the individual. We can take it one step further. What defines willpower? What is it? Is it a belief? Is it a fixed mindset? Is it a value? As in, I have this much willpower, I can measure it. Well, one thing I like to compare it to is a hiker climbing a mountain. As the hiker climbs higher and higher, they perceive things, such as sizes, differently, until by the time they make it to the top, their perspective is completely different than the one that they started with. And this can be compared to the process of exercising willpower over time. Your perspective at the end is completely different than your perspective at the beginning. Willpower may change based on cultural perceptions, but it does not change based on age. A study involving researchers at Weill Cornell Medical College and the University of Washington has shown that willpower remains largely consistent throughout someone's life. There have been numerous experiments in willpower that have reinforced the idea that it is fixed value. But what if the idea of a fixed value is just that, an idea, and once we get past that, we're only limited to what we believe? Now, am I saying that if I believe I can fly, that I should do so? No, of course not. Remember my example related to the Chinese students. These students are raised culturally in the belief that perseverance is a virtue, and therefore they're expected to demonstrate grit in completing schoolwork, while Americans are culturally raised to value scholastic ability over determination. An example, while writing this portion of the script, I, an American, kept checking the time to see when I would be done with my allocated time for work. Now, does this mean that we cannot do anything about the cultural difference in willpower? No, of course not. But because we were taught differently from an early age, we must take a different approach to how we go about building our willpower. We need, for lack of a better word, I'm going to call them force amplifiers, to help us get things done. Now, in my case, that involved working in set blocks of time followed by a rest period. That was the method that worked for me. But is this a self-fulfilling situation because I take breaks, because I live that cultural perception? No, it's not, because if you increase the period of work over time, you can gradually acclimate yourself to completing tasks on par with the Chinese cultural norm. Perceptions are what matter. Some perceptions are more useful than others. If you believe that your willpower is infinite, and what you perceive backs those views up, then that will be successful. But if you begin to doubt that your willpower is infinite, and what you perceive is that your willpower is finite, that will be your new reality. You will switch from one to the other. There are a surprising number of connections with willpower and success in your personal life. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania have found that willpower has a stronger link to financial success than a person's IQ. During the 1970s, Walter Mischel, a professor at Stanford University, started his famous marshmallow experiment, in which he gave kindergartners the option to have 1 marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows later. Newer studies by researchers at the University of California and New York University have determined that there are other variables to account for in such an experiment, such as socioeconomic status. This research throws into question some aspects of the marshmallow test. After all, kindergartners from poor families have less guarantees than kindergartners from more well-off families. Thus, the kindergartners are more likely to choose a short-term guarantee over a less likely long-term option. But despite this, the basic principles of the marshmallow test hold true, that there is a link between willpower and success. 40 years after Mischel completed the initial experiment, he came back and invited the participants to join him in a laboratory and do a laboratory experiment. This experiment proved something very interesting. The differences in willpower had largely held up over the 4 decades. And after that experiment, he concluded that there are 2 separate types of mental frameworks. Now, at the start of this talk, I briefly touched on those frameworks, and this experiment is where they originated. In the first cold framework, logic and reason prevail, but the second hot framework revolves around impulsiveness and emotion. So, I'd like you to try something with me. I'd like you to think of one thing that you struggle with. It could be eating, putting off assignments or chores, anything that you can think of. Now, envision putting that thing, whatever it is, in a framework, in a box. Pick up the box and set it aside. You can acknowledge that it exists, that it's something you struggle with, but keep in mind that it does not define you. And for whatever reason, if you do that thing again, just envision the box, acknowledge what happened, accept it, and move on. So, to wrap it all up, willpower is fundamentally a thing that rests upon you. You get to decide how much willpower you have and how much control you want to have over your own decisions. Thank you.